welcome to Swan Island Dahlias. I'm Heather Schlow and I'm part of the team here. Today we're going to talk fertilizer. Yes, your dahlias need food. There is so much confusion and so much talk. Some believe they don't need to fertilize their plants. Some aren't sure what to fertilize. And then there's the talks all over the board of what to fertilize with. So today we're going to share with you our process and our thoughts on fertilizing and what we do here at the farm. Just remember, dahlias like some nitrogen, just not too much. They can't take too rich of soil. So be careful on your compost. Be careful what you're adding to enrich your soil. Remember that steer or cow manure is the only compost that we recommend that you use, and that you don't use any mushroom compost or chicken manure or anything like that. So when it comes to fertilizers, yes, dahlias need food. Just as people need food, you need to think about your plants needing water, food, and sun to survive. So every fertilizer has a 3-number component listed on it. And the 3 numbers stand for NPK. So the first one being nitrogen. That's the most important we're going to talk about today with dahlias. Second one being phosphorus. And the third one being potassium. Those 3 components are key to making sure you purchase the right type of fertilizer. So we recommend that the first number be the lowest, or at least about half of your other components. Now there's all kinds of discussions about people having too much phosphorus, too much potash in their soil, but you can really hurt your dahlias with too much nitrogen. They do need some nitrogen. So this becomes a little tricky information about trying to figure out what your dahlias need, because your soil is going to be different from the neighbors or the guy across town or in a different state what we use. So we recommend that the first number, so you can find on every fertilizer, the 3-number components should be listed on the front or the back. And just remember, those are percentages or ratios compared to each other, and they're not necessarily exact numbers when you look at the whole brand or the whole bag of fertilizer. So this variety right here, I love this product. It's granular. You're going to just sprinkle it about 1/2 cup per plant. We use it. We love it. I use it at home. It's called Dr. Earth Flower Girl, and it's really promoting an all health plant, plus producing extra blooms, plus giving your plant some nitrogen. We just don't want to push too much nitrogen, as I mentioned. So make sure that this first number, in most cases, is lower than the other 2 numbers. We would ideally like it to be about half of the other numbers. So in this case, we have a 3-9-4. This is a 2-15-15. This is great. We use it. It goes a long ways if you've ever used this product. But it could be maybe just slightly higher in nitrogen, especially if you find that your dahlias don't seem as green or as tall as you want them to be. It's really tricky knowing what to add if you aren't sure what your yard needs. So it's like, what do I add? What do I not add? And it really becomes, every year you may have to make some adjustments based on the growing conditions, the weather, your soil. Maybe you've moved to a different house. So it's really important to feed them though. If you are not feeding your dahlias, you cannot expect them to thrive. They are living and need food to survive. So if you're planted in the ground, which you might see these guys behind me are, you're fertilizing every 3 to 4 weeks. Most likely about every 3. Some people stretch it to 4. If you are in pots, if you're growing in a pot or a container on your patio, you're fertilizing every 2 to 3 weeks. So you're not stretching it as long, because the nutrients, the fertilizer is going to wash through your pot quicker and it won't last as long. Don't forget, one of the biggest and most important keys to growing beautiful, gorgeous, stunning dahlias is that you must water, water, water. And it means water deeply. Not 30 seconds holding the hose, not 5 minutes of a mister or something going. It needs to get down 6, 8, 10 inches where those roots are, depending on what growing stage we are in. So really think about deep watering, less often, but watering for longer periods of time. Now here in the Pacific Northwest, we're kind of coming out of a heat stress, a heat craziness for our summer. And it definitely took a toll and can be very stressful on your plants if they're experiencing extreme heat or an extreme weather change, or you've got a pest issue. Stress will create a lot of issues for your plants. For one, insects will thrive on them and take over, but it also makes them use up their food faster. So if they don't have enough food, they can't thrive. So be sure that you're fertilizing, and maybe during those heat stress times, you increase or up how far apart your fertilizing times are as they need it more often. If you're seeing lack of blooms, there's a few reasons, but the main thing is dahlias need at least 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight. Again, deep watering. This is probably the #1 issue with most people. So water, 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 and make sure it's deep. And then you can't expect them to thrive and grow if you aren't fertilizing them. So you cannot forget to give them a boost. If you ever have a bunch of dahlias and everybody looks nice and healthy, but you've got a couple maybe that just aren't thriving, they're just a little smaller, maybe not as green, they just don't seem to be thriving as fast as the others, give them a boost. Give them a higher dose of nitrogen. Most of the time we would tell you stay away from Miracle-Gro products, and I hate to down them because I love them for my petunias and my hanging baskets, but they're just too high in nitrogen and they will actually cause you a lot of harm more than good. So if you have plants that are struggling, we would recommend that you give them 1 dose of Miracle-Gro or 1 dose of a higher nitrogen product. So you want that first number to be equal to the other numbers or higher than the other numbers. You want that nitrogen to be high. And what that will do is send green growth. It will give it some extra jump power and get it to take off. So if you feel like it's lacking a little, don't be afraid to give it a boost. Now remember, we don't want to do that all the time. So I don't want to recommend that you use Miracle-Gro all the time. You do not want to be fertilizing with it on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. Again, almost all of Miracle-Gro products are high in nitrogen. There are 1 or 2 on the market that are lower in nitrogen, but we definitely want to be sure that we're using the lower nitrogen products for the majority of the season. If you have a plant that seems just a bit yellow, or maybe just isn't greening up, when you're giving that dose of Miracle-Gro or a higher nitrogen fertilizer, you could also do this with regular lower nitrogen fertilizer. You can give them a boost of Epsom salt. So if you aren't familiar with Epsom salt, I definitely recommend that you check into it. It's going to give them a high dose of magnesium, which will help the greening of the plant, and it will do it very quickly. So it's really important. This product has become a lot more popular, I would say, in the last 5 years, and we've seen great results with it. So if you have a plant that's just a little more yellow and maybe not greening up as fast or not taking off, use the Epsom salts with some higher nitrogen. Now, I get a lot of calls. People say I use 10-10 or I use 16-16, meaning that their fertilizer is a 16-16-16. I've done that every time or every week. Well, there you have a problem. If you've only done it once early in the season, you're probably just fine. If you're doing a 16-16 every week or every bi-weekly, you are going to have a nightmare with too much nitrogen, most likely, unless your soil for some reason is really lacking. So as our season goes, in the beginning, we definitely want to make sure they have some nitrogen. Nitrogen helps us with those green, lush plants. But as we turn into a little later season, once your plants are up and they're blooming, and we're probably about halfway through the blooming season, for us that's about late August, early September, we're going to transition to something that has a 0 component of nitrogen. We don't want to push any green growth at that point. We want to push blooms, and that's what your potash and phosphorus will do. So you can look to using Alaska More Bloom later in the season. Do not use it early in the season. It does not have any nitrogen, and your plants do need some nitrogen to get boosted, to get thriving in the early stages. So we definitely want to make sure that we switch to this as we go through the season and move to later. So just remember, nitrogen breaks down the quickest. So it's great to use in early in the season, but as we get later in the season, it won't be as big of a benefit. But don't be afraid to reapply your fertilizer throughout the season and throughout the summer. If you're not reapplying it, you cannot expect them to thrive. So let's talk about why not to give too much nitrogen. Nitrogen can be very beneficial in giving you a beautiful, gorgeous green plant. But too much nitrogen will give you tuber rot. It will give you pop center or open centered blooms where you have the pollen showing when they shouldn't be showing. Extra tall plants. We know that dahlias genetically are already a little tall, and if we add too much nitrogen, we're just adding height on those plants and making even more of a nightmare to keep them standing up, keep them from falling over and breaking. You end up with also weak stems or weak flower heads that maybe hang over. Sometimes that's just genetic, but if you have an excess amount of nitrogen in your soil, then you're gonna have floppy bloom heads. And ideally, really, nitrogen late in the season creates weak tubers if you're digging and storing. So it's really important that you try not to add too much nitrogen. But again, if your dahlias are lacking at any point, giving them a boost of fertilizer with nitrogen, it will not hurt. So what we do here at the farm is we have our soil tested every year. And if you ever get to a point in your growing season or you've had trouble year after year, I highly recommend you look into your county extension office into doing a soil test so you can see what's happening. We have been growing on this same property for 70 plus years and we don't change anything. Every year our potassium is high, but it consistently stays high and has never been an issue for us. I know there's been a lot of talk on social media and different things about having too high a potassium or having too much potash and the dangers of that. You know, for us, we find the biggest thing is having too much nitrogen and how much damage it can cause. So just be kind of careful and aware and know that if you're having trouble or things don't seem to be growing the same year to year, it's something you might look into considering. We add a 10-15-15 at the beginning of our season, about 3 weeks after planting, and that is a broadcast granule fertilizer that goes on our fields. It has a slow release nitrogen pellet that is slow release, meaning it's going to release that nitrogen over a long period of time. But we will also continue to fertilize our dahlias the entire growing season. We fertilize about every 3 weeks and we're using a low nitrogen. However, it's a seaweed based product that's commercial, but we're also doing that on our foliage. So that is being spread across and feeding them through their foliage. And we are spraying for our pests at the same time so that we can do a little less tractor work through the fields. So it's just something to think about, but I highly recommend that you think about feeding your dahlias and that you don't forget that they need deep watering, because that seems to be the biggest issue with people not getting beautiful, big, gorgeous blooms, is that they just aren't giving their dahlias enough food or enough water. I want to thank you so much for watching us today. Please make sure to follow us on Instagram, like us on Facebook, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you so much and have a beautiful day.